Alright, hello and welcome. This is CT5 and today we're going to be talking about victory squares. And more specifically, when to take them in round one. Factors you should be, I think, are worth considering in helping you make a decision as to whether or not to take a victory square in round one or not. So going to ramble a little bit about victory squares more generally, and then we can start to do some of those thinking exercises. This is a video in the Making Better Moves series, so got the map and we've got our characters popping up. Should be fun. So victory squares, most generally in Card Hunter, they serve as both a timer and a way to force action, right? If you think about it, when you're on the victory, when you've controlled the victory squares and you're at 5 stars, 5 victory points, how do you win? If the opponent passes. As long as you have control of the victory squares and you're at 5 stars, if your opponent passes, you pass, you win. Ding, right? And so if we get control of the victory squares early, we sort of start this timer. In the first round, no big deal, right? If you gain control of the victory squares in the first round, not too big of a deal. 1 star to 0. But you know, if your opponent doesn't want to do anything, if they have a weak hand, if they're just scared like me and don't want to engage, and they just keep passing, they can do it for a time, but eventually, you know, if they just keep passing, they're going to lose. So eventually they have to do some sort of action to neutralize this advantage, or to gain, or ideally, to gain an advantage since they're already behind on victory points. Now obviously, getting 1 victory point early, again, isn't a huge deal. It's just like, a mild inconvenience for the opponent at that point. However, let's think about the way you often win a game of Card Hunter. Like, what actually happens? Like, how do you get those 6 stars, those 6 victory points? Right, so like, obviously our deck has a game plan. We have a plan in mind when we have our deck. We want it to do a specific thing, and that thing will help us get us victory points. But when we actually go about playing the game, I have a feeling that the most common way people win is by killing 2 characters, that's 4 points, and then getting 2 victory points from having controlled the victory squares. That's 6 stars total, right? I think that's the most common, almost certainly for warrior-based teams, and obviously the team will depend a bit, right? 3 priests, there's slightly bigger chance for a 3-priest team to win just from 6 points from victory squares, but there's some, priests can also play beat down. It's, it will depend a little bit, but I suspect that is the most common way. So in that sense, getting the first round victory square is pretty nice, both in that, you're 1 step closer. It doesn't feel like much right now, but it will feel very big later on when you get that, if you're like at 5 points, right? Or if you can sneak in the 2nd point early, then you can just have to focus in on a kill. It helps like focus your game plan like in the actual game to help you make your decisions. And so I mentioned briefly earlier about how the opponent's going to want to try to neutralize this advantage, right? If they also get on a victory square, like in a map like this, we have a person here, if they also put their person on, then okay, that advantage is gone. Except, wait. I guess we're the fancy skins now. We have victory square control turn 1. Right, and, Dwarf Waddle. Dwarf Waddle. Falling round. Everyone's passed. This is round 2. 1 star. Right, 1 victory star up here to 0 down here. And now the warrior moves on to here. Okay, cool. We have equal control of the victory squares, except this player is down 1 card. Right, so that's sort of the more subtle and yet fairly relevant and noticeable advantage of getting the victory square early. Your opponent then has to spend resources, time, cards, whatever, to get onto a victory square. And now you're technically up 1 card. You have 1 more card that you can use in this round to do stuff with. So the victory squares, right, over the long game, they act as a timer to force your opponent to do something. And in the short term, what that will often look like is the opponent taking a victory square, like in this case. And so now we can do stuff. Oh, the warrior's there. Well, okay, well, let's get a priest up or wizard up and start harassing them or something, right? And then like, oh, they can do this, but wait. Okay, so now they do this to get their own, harass us, except wait, our warrior can move. We can just waddle, or warrior can just waddle up here. Oh no, warrior can waddle up here and start threatening. Whereas this warrior is possibly stuck. As to the best of our knowledge, is stuck, right? If we don't see their hand, we should suspect they have a step attack, but sometimes things happen with warriors. If we get control of the victory square turn 1, we have the point, but now round 2, how do we leverage this advantage? And that's a question to ask, and that will depend and might not exactly be in the scope of this video, but we'll see. We'll talk about it. We'll figure it out. It'll be fun. Another thing I can mention is that on the broad scale, your team is up 1 card, as I mentioned, right? Because the enemy team, they had to use a move card to get onto the victory square. The person they moved on, since they're down a movement card, is, in theory, more vulnerable to attack. That is one way to leverage the advantage. So let's say this is what it looks like at the start of round 2, right? If we want to attack this warrior, maybe we like sprint over or something. If this warrior wants, they're just like, oh, calm down. They just walk back. Right? Easy. No problem. But let's say in round 1, we got into victory square, they got into victory square. So round 1, we have victory squares. Round 2, they hop on. Round 2, now we sprint over. Can the dwarf run? If that dwarf has no move cards, right? They're in a weird spot. Our dwarf, like, sure, dwarves smack each other a bit, but then our wizard can hop in and throw stuff at them now too. Right? And like, imagine if if we had more warriors or something, then multiple warriors swarming around, and now suddenly this priest starts to feel really uncomfortable. Priest down here starts to feel really uncomfortable if we had as another warrior instead. If it was something like this, now the priest is like, do I want to move up? But I need to help my teammate? What's going on? So that is certainly one thing to keep in mind, right? When the opponent moves on, that person they move on, if there's no other move cards, they're a little bit more vulnerable. They don't have the guaranteed racial move to move them somewhere else if need be. Okay, back with realistic examples, because no one plays elves. That is actually a fun thing. A lot of maps have victory squares that are 4 spaces away from a starting location, i.e. perfect for elves to take round 1, but abundance of warriors have so many extra moves, extra steps that they can just hop on. Wizards have telekinesis, nothing matters. No one plays elves. Okay, let's actually talk now about things to consider when taking victory squares round 1. Oh wait, there is one too many people here. Bloop. Now we're playing Card Hunter, not fake Card Hunter. Okay, so moving on to the victory square round 1, we talked about the advantages earlier. It's obviously good if you can take it, but preferably you take it, at minimal cost to yourself. So a couple things that are going to be somewhat related, but first one, look at the enemy team composition and think about possible threats, right? So like in this case, we've taken the victory square, opponent's taking the victory square.
I guess maybe if I move like this, and then move like this, and then, yeah, maybe move like this as well.
Now when you think what happens when the opponent moves, say, oh, that's 3 spaces. Ha, dwarves. Here? I think the dwarf can see from here, but if not, they'd have to go here. So funny enough, I understand we're supposed to play player 1, but seeing the dwarf move like this up here, like I'm immediately thinking like, oh god, is Pumpkin Dwarf Warrior going to Mighty Charge in or something? That's my first thought. Like, oh god, this could be really bad. Oh, I guess I did this backwards. Crap. Okay, we move like this. Warrior moves, or their wizard moves, and now we're like, okay, let's nimble strike on here. Okay, so how much sense this makes will depend a little bit on what's in our hand, right? Because we're moving directly into line of sight of our opponent's wizard. That's generally not advised, right? There's a couple of things going on here of like, okay, one, right? We move into line of sight of wizard, which means they can use their cards, which means if they just throw out one spell, they've gotten value because they, at the end of the round, you can only keep 2 cards, right? So everyone starts out with 4 card hands, the move, and 3 cards. They spend 1 card to move. They just need to throw 1 spell, like maybe like, Stone Spikes or something. And that's all they need to do, and they've gotten value because they're no longer discarding that Stone Spikes or whatever other card in their hand, and they can keep all that stuff. So maybe not the best move right here. Then again, if we have like a lot of armor, or if we have a reliable mail or like another movement, this is actually pretty reasonable, right? So in addition to looking at team composition, at enemy team composition and what they could have, just as important is to think about, do you have a plan B? / how can you support this person here? The person going onto the victory squares. So that could be, our Pumpkin Dwarf. It could be our Pumpkin Dwarf having another move to hop out of the way or something, right? That's one way of supporting them to get them out of a bad situation. It could be the priest moving in for a heal or a buff or something. It could even be the wizard using a control spell on our warrior, the Pumpkin Warrior, to again move them out of the way. Right? A lot of possible options. Another possible way to do it is if maybe there's like a falling round or something. If the enemy warrior walks up here, okay, cool, warriors are having fun slapping each other, great. So question number 2 is, if this were to happen, do you have a good way to either, to support it, right? And the priest could, in theory, if they had to move on and throw some attacks on as well, right? That's another way to support it, to make their approach be very costly. Because like inevitably, especially in a competitive game against a real human, you're going to take damage, right? But it's about like, how can you get value out of it, right? Like, you're going to get hit, that's inevitable. Are you getting hit for a good reason? / can you make it really painful for them? That is one big consideration. The next one I think we want to think about is, how valuable is the move card that I'm using to get onto the victory square? So there's both the sort of literal quality on the card, i.e. like the difference between like a sprint and a cautious sneak, or like, a team walk or team shift versus cautious sneak or walk or, shuffle, right? Like a shuffle is a fantastic way for this priest to get onto the victory square. To move 1 spot on the victory square, great. But using the sprint to do that same thing, less good, right? That sprint could be used to surprise, ambush the dwarf warrior. The other dimension is in relation to the character who's hopping on and the sort of the relative density of move cards in that person's deck, right? So I feel like move cards are probably the most useful typically for wizards and warriors because they want to move places to do things. So it's funny, right, in that wizards and priests can be very stationary in that once they're in a good spot, they can just sit there for the most part. But it's typically going to be easier for a priest to sit still because it's going to be easier to maintain line of sight with your own team than the wizard who's trying to maintain line of sight with the opponent. And the opponent is going to be doing their best to avoid being seen by the wizard, right? So wizards probably have to move a little bit more often than priests. Warriors, they obviously need to move to be useful and threatening and scary. So wizard and warrior, in the an offensive-oriented wizard probably needs moves the most. It's sort of equally valuable for a wizard and warrior to move around to do offensive stuff, but warriors have a high density of moves from step attacks, right? Whereas wizards, it's probably just from the boots. So using a valuable move card on a wizard to get onto a victory square, you might want to hesitate, right? You might want to save that because you might need that move card later on to get into a better spot to hit your opponents, to get away from scary warriors coming in at you, stuff like that. And since I'm used to using wizards with flank move, I'm thinking like, okay, when would I want to flank move? The cantrip is very, very valuable as well. That's a decision we have to make when we actually play the game. Is it worth it or not? But that is something to keep in mind. If you think you might be in a vulnerable position in the following round, if you use the move card now, maybe don't do it, right? Let's say was like this or something, right? Next round, warrior could in theory go here, stab you, you try to go away, nimble strike. Alternatively, if you run away, then okay, you're fine, right? This is better. But now, then, maybe priest can start to sneak up and be aggro. Like if this were a warrior, this would be a bigger consideration, right? Next thing, if the opponent passes early, if we think about the sort of general stereotypical-esque thing of like, okay, player 1 moves, player 2 moves, player 1 moves, player 2 moves, player 1 moves, player 2 moves. Cool, everyone's around, everyone's done all their moves, we can pass or whatever else, and life is good, right? If someone doesn't follow this pattern, it's bound to happen. Gotta start thinking, why did they pass? Oh no! What could they be up to? So remember, people often pass. Main reason to pass. They have a weak hand, so they want to move to the next round. Like if they're passing in a sort of neutral, even situation like this, when no one's on the victory squares and whatnot. Reasons for passing include just trying to move to the next round to get a better hand, but also, alternatively, just as likely, waiting to see you make a move so they have a better idea, so they can make a better plan for themselves, right? And part of making that better plan is finding a vulnerable target to attack, right? So we talked about, I don't know, maybe priest happily shuffles on, and then human does a dash team. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh shit, wizard's on the victory square now. Look at that, wizard's on the victory square. You can see the priest in stab dwarves, in stab range, right? Like, uh-oh, stuff. Alternatively, if I'm consistent with my story and it's like, oh, some people haven't moved yet, then it's like, okay, dash team, same idea, right? Oh my god, victory squares and I'm now threatening this. And depending on stuff, right, could go here and then walk with this wizard here to get into that first position I mentioned. Be mindful of the pass. If you're against 2 wizards, 1 priest, hey, volcano, it's the usual stuff. Be mindful, be aware. Okay, well, it's one more thing to keep in mind. I'm going to use this map as an example, and then we can talk about other maps. So we've decided to take a victory square round 1. Waddle, waddle. And then they've also taken thing with round 1. And then we decided to move our priesty boy here. And we're like, you know what? Let's hop on. Let's get, should we do this? Is this worth considering? We can think of it as effectively the same situation, where right now with 1 character from each side on the victory squares, no one's going to control the victory squares. If we hop on, it's like right? It's very, very similar, very comparable situation. And just like before, all the same questions are gonna pop in, right? Like, is it worth spending the move card here? Is it worth being down one move, knowing that next turn this fellow could just walk up and be in better range to poke us? Have they passed a lot? Are we now setting ourselves up for crazy shenanigans? The interesting thing about taking the second victory square like this is that they've spent one extra card to get onto a victory square. So that's one less. So like if things do get really bad, that's one less card they have to mess with your plans, right? On the flip side, you spent 2 cards to get on there. Now maybe it's really worth it for them to actually make an attack, seeing that you've committed 2 extra moves. Right? Moves are typically the most valuable. Moves are very, very valuable in Card Hunter, and knowing that your opponent has used 2 like this, right? Like if they do have like a team sprint shenanigans, it's like, oh my gosh, I can really safely go in on target now, knowing that the other one has very little they can do to get to us. And if they do get to us, right? Say stuff happened, we're here, and this is all round 1. This is all round 1, right? Now say Mr. Pumpkin Warrior tries to join the action over here. They've spent 3 cards now to get to this one spot. So they do attack us, only 1 attack. Yeah, keep these in mind as you play the game. And it's a lot of this is going to be your intuition as to whether or not it's worth it to go for it or not. And then, speaking of intuition, that's kind of why I decided to make this video, is because I noticed myself in a lot of my recent games, I've been more aggressively taking the victory squares round 1 than previously. Whether it's good or not, hard to say, right? There are times when, hey, people are waiting for you to overcommit, and then they smack you for it. That will happen. But if you get the advantage, then we get into my happy place of being able to just pass and watching the opponent flail around awkwardly, trying to navigate the situation, and then, we have the advantage, let's make use of it, right? It feels a lot more fun to be in that position rather than trying to find a way to make things even or to make a good attack without completely screwing yourself over. So it's certainly a more pleasant aspect, more pleasant way to play. I think the other reason is that, like, when I first started, I grew up in the era of 6 damage, step 4 nimble strikes that don't fly, but for moving 4 spaces, you're still getting an unblockable, basically. And so a nimble strike out of nowhere, and suddenly all the action's happening, damage is bigger, and should be crazy. So that made me very hesitant previously, because it was very easy for multiple dwarves to suddenly be on top of you and like, you have to commit a little bit more to move super far now. So I think taking the victory squares round 1 is a lot safer than before, but just be thoughtful. Don't autopilot it. If you sense something is up with their passing, whatever else, it's okay to not take it. Better to lose a square or lose a star or not gain a star than to just immediately lose the game if you suspect something really weird is happening. So let's talk about some other maps. We actually did a pretty good job of talking about. I feel like I did a decent job of talking about this map, which is one of those ones where it's really tempting to get the victory square. But let's talk about a slightly more simpler case, which will also be equally tempting to get onto the victory square. These maps where there's only one victory square, so much shit is going to happen around here, and it's really nice to be able to get control of victory squares, right? Because if you do, what's your opponent going to do? Right? They have to kill you somehow or force you to retreat. And the funny thing here is, like, okay, say they do kill you. Now you have someone else to take the victory square. What the fuck are they gonna do? What are they gonna do? Gust of War. Wizards are great. Pressing bash, violent spin. There are ways, obviously, but like that is one of the troubles, right? Like Streams of Blood is another example of this type of map where there's only one victory square in the middle, and it's a funny thing where getting control of it is really awesome, but you are vulnerable to attack. The other point is that, like, you have control of the victory squares, you're forcing people to go up to you, so, you know, if you do retreat, it's probably a little bit safer, right? Because they've already used moves to get up here. That said, if they do have another move, chances are they're going to take instead, and now you have your own set of problems to deal with. So, it's yeah, it's interesting. It can feel really awful when you're behind. Like if you had to retreat. Like imagine being in this position as fancy skin team over here. This sucks. This looks awful. What are you gonna do? Where are you gonna go? I guess you beat up this priest, hope the wizard can do something about that wizard and go from there. But like this looks awful, right? And like, yeah. This is like the nasty thing about these one victory square maps where it's like if you're pushed back, it's life is hard because there's no other ways for you to go, right? If we compare it with Hypothalamus Havoc, if they well, okay, this map's weird because the bridges are like these awkward and painful choke points potentially, but it's like you can run somewhere else. You can sort of get control of victory squares if your opponent goes for this, like you have some room to breathe and they're sort of cut off and you can choose who you want to counterattack, right? But in this ass-tastic position here, it's just like you have to go through the front door where they're ready and waiting for you, right? This is, as fancy skin team over here, this is not a happy place. You know what's another map that's really, really hard to come back from? One of these cell maps. So like this one, I think this one is like the most notable case, but Mushroom Glade and arguably Summoning Race, but I think Mushroom Glade is another good example. So on these maps where there are like a million victory squares everywhere,
if you're down a character,
right, so if we're a basic skin team now, like how do we win? Right, it's like okay. This sounds obvious, and you know we'll let's compare this situation with this map. What's the difference between being down 2v3 on this map whereas compared to the previous one? Right, both of these maps have a lot of victory squares, and in maps with a lot of victory squares, you know, typically whoever has more characters, they can sort of easily sneak points in by standing on the victory squares, and just because they're guaranteed to have more people, right? So why is it easier for the team that's down one character to come back on a map like this as opposed to the previous one? It's because the victory squares are all clustered together. And because they're all clustered together, and it's not like there's like other random spots around, and because of that, it's entirely possible that like these two units, the basic human priest and dwarf warrior, are like really healthy or in a really strong position. And if the three fancy skin units are all in like lower health, right, like low, medium health, and are precarious, where it's just like one, maybe two hits will kill them, where they're sort of like skirting around the edges, knowing they sort of need to make they need to attack them, right? Because they're positionally behind. They're up on terms of units, but positionally they're behind, and that timer is ticking for this team now. It's ticking for a fancy skin team. But if they're all at medium low health, it can be awkward to deal with. It can be really awkward being in this position, right? And then these people, like, they don't have a reason to hop up, but like, let's just say they did, right? Threaten a stab, for example. Well, shit. Are you gonna run away some more? But you need to go here. Like, well, I guess you could go in now and set up an unblockable, right? Which is, but like, it's now hard for them. It's hard to get 2 people from Fancy Skin team onto the victory squares because the two basic skin units are blocking the front. So you sort of have to sneak around like this, but then you're just spending more time in cards, and if you're not careful, you do something here, like, oh, dash in. So let's compare this, right, to this map, where the victory square is all over the place. So now what happens? Let's say basic skin team has control of these 2. Cool. But if Fancy Skin team just wants to play it slow and keep it simple, they can do this, and they have the advantage. Right now they have the advantage in every way. Positionally, they're up on units, and positionally. If they're medium low HP, it's still precarious. They still need to be careful because, you know, surprise can happen, and warrior, I don't know, flank move, impaling stab, quick run, mighty bludgeon, whatever, right? That can still happen. But, since they have control of the victory squares, basic skin team is the clock is ticking for them. They're the ones who don't have time. Because if they pass and look for that perfect hand, the other team is getting 1 step closer to winning. And since they've already killed a unit, right, now it's like 3 stars to 0 or whatever. So this type of map is probably even harder to come back from than like I mean, man, coming back from behind is like its own topic that I'm probably not qualified to talk about because I'm not very good at it, right? My MO, as I mentioned earlier, my MO, get some sort of advantage and then press that advantage. Preferably by being on victory squares and passing and passing and passing. That's how I play. I'm not good at initiating. So it'd be great to have someone else talk about that. Who's good at that? But what I can talk about is just, let's look at some other maps. Some other fun maps, like Dojo. There's 2 more maps I'm going to talk about. This one and one other similar-ish one. Okay, so let's talk about this one. So what's neat about this one is... Okay, so this is another map where once you're behind, it's hard to catch up because let's look at the most extreme example of 2 units down on this side, this person like here or something. This person probably died because that'll happen, and then it's like this. What are you gonna do as basic skin wizard? Because basic skin wizard is the whoops. So what are you gonna do as a basic skin wizard down here? Right? How do you win from this? Hint, you probably don't. That's usually what happens on this type of map. Or when it's positioned like this, then just the victory squares are, you know, you can just send on the victory squares and win. What's neat about this map, / why it's relevant to this topic, the players have a choice on sort of where to fight. That makes sense, right? Because like the victory squares on the very end are very far apart. So if one team gravitates to one side, say Fancy Skin team takes this victory square. Now basic skin team has a choice. They can either engage with this one or try and take the other victory squares. And then if we talk about the idea of like keeping your team connected and together, then then okay, taking the middle is good, right? Everyone's all together, easy to do stuff. But then if all the fighting is in the middle, then there's all sorts of craziness happening, and like maybe there's a charge or step attack and run in and can shoot stuff. So it's like going to the sides is nice and safe, but now you can sort of give your opponent the choice of what to do, right? They can take the victory squares themselves or fight you if you're off to the side. If they go for the victory squares, they can be safe as well, or they can take the middle, knowing that you've already committed one person onto the other victory square there, and suddenly taking the middle is a lot safer. So let's compare this with this freaky map, River of Tescal. This map is freaky. Why is it freaky? Is it related to the victory squares? You bet it is. 100%. So like in Dojo, there's 3 victory squares. Whoever gets control of that middle one, right, is kind of, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And it's kind of like the Woodhome Blizzard, the 1 victory square map I started with, where since this one is like the tiebreaker, right? Whoever gets control of the middle one, presumably if they have someone back here as well, they're the one getting the victory points. So if that dwarf dies, another dwarf rises to take its place. What are you gonna do? Be sad, right? And so, right, unlike Dojo, where like players can sort of choose where to go, all the action's happening here, and if you're getting here, it's hard to get around. Yes, you have Nimble Strike. Yes, you have Telekinesis, but then you're deep in enemy territory. Like, so that's a bit of a gamble. But at the same time, so is hopping onto this middle square, because now your opponents, so let's say, and now basic team is like, all right, well, gotta beat him up. He's in the middle. Gotta beat him up. And look at the wizard. Can't see enemies at all. Can see friends, which is cool. But do you want to use a telekinesis on your own person? Do you want to use a telekinesis on your own person to bring them back? If it's to save them, worth it. But oh shit, now your opponent takes that middle. Right? So it's tricky. Once again, to be the sort of safe generic claims, a lot of this is going to come down to intuition and strength of your cards and whatnot, right? But it's just like, middle is cool for victory squares, less good for staying healthy, unless you have like 3 parries or something and you're against warriors. Then you're very happy. Yeah, this is a tricky map. Stabs are nice, if you notice, because 100% of the action is going to all be here, and look, they're all 2 spaces away. Stabs, very good. Wizards, pretty cool. Wizards, like, it's nice to have the wizard if you're defending, or like if your opponent has control of the 2 victory squares, like in this case, if we're the basic team. If we have the wizard, this is cool because we can poke this middle one safely and make them uncomfortable. If they feel uncomfortable enough such that they feel like they need to retreat the priest or the warrior, then it's our turn to play. Then we go in. It's cool. Life is good, right? If you're up against warriors, though, then if you have the defense, take that middle. If you don't, might be worth. But alternatively, just be ready to smack whoever comes in the middle dead, right? Like this is, yeah, it's a scary little spot. And sort of touch back on the victory squares acting as like a figurative timer, right, for the game to end, right? Because it's very likely that if you have 2 people like me playing against each other, it's like, I don't want to go in the middle. No, I don't want to die. And when that happens, well then pass. But things gotta happen eventually. Someone wants to win, presumably. No one likes a draw in these types of competitive games. I think that's about all I've got. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful. And I will see you all next time with more of that funny new deck I have. Till then, take care.